Hello everyone, welcome back to another episode of OpusCorner. In this episode, we are going to discuss the music of Béla Bartók and the recording of Karina Canellakis, who is conducting the Netherlands Philharmonic Radio Orchestra, and they are performing Béla Bartók two pieces. The first one is the 4 orchestra pieces and the second one is Concerto for orchestra. This time I'm going to start the video with a very special thing. Quotes from Béla Bartók himself and also one quote from his dear friend Zoltán Kodály. Az én igazi vezéreszmém, amelynek mióta csak mint zeneszerző magamra találtam, tökéletesen tudatában vagyok. A népek testvérré válásának eszméje, a testvérré válás minden háborúság és minden viszály ellenére, ezt az eszmét igyekszem, amennyire erőmből telik, szolgálni zenémben. Ezért nem vonom ki magam semmiféle hatás alól, eredjen a szlovák, román, arab vagy bármiféle más forrásból. Csak tiszta, friss és egészséges legyen az a forrás. Szűkebb értelemben vett parasztzene tehát öntudatlanul működő természeti erő átalakító munkájának eredménye. Minden tanultságtól mentes embertömeg ösztönszerű alkotása. Épp oly természeti tünemény, mint például az állat vagy növényvilág különféle megnyilvánuló formái. Ennek folytán egyedei, az egyes dallamok, a legmagasabb művészi tökéletesség példái. Mit talált a falun, amit mindennél többre tartott? Megtalálta először is saját maga ösztönzését. Egy ismeretlen világot, egy rég elmúltnak vélt magyarságot teljes virágzásában. Ez elegendő volt arra, hogy a magyar nép jövőjébe vetett hite megújuljon. Új stílusa kibontakozásához hozzájárult aztán a francia zene. Ez a kettős hatás, a régi magyar népzene és latin szellem szabadított fel kezdeteinek egyoldalú német tájékozódásából. These quotes will be actually very interesting for us and I will get back to them later in this video. I would like to show you now two very beautiful folk songs, and the first one is in Asian style and the other one is in newer style. We know when they were collected, but we don't really know when they were born, so to say. And the ancient one is either in pentatonics, based on pentatonic scale, or different model scales, so like Frege, Mixolydic, these kind of things. If you don't know what pentatonic or model scales are, I will just put quickly up a table and you can pause the video and check it. And also how they should be performed. The old ones are more parlando rubato and the new ones are mostly tempo giusto. few words about Béla Bartók as a composer, but also as a fantastic pianist. Maybe you don't know that he was indeed really a great pianist. We have some recordings by him. Unfortunately, not too many, but it's always a real treat listening some of his pieces and also some other pieces he recorded, not only solo, but some chamber music recordings as well. He was a fantastic pianist. And he started studying at the Franz Liszt Music Academy in Budapest. His teachers were István Thomán, who was himself a student of Franz Liszt. So there was a very strong link between Liszt and Bartók himself. And he also studied composition. His teacher was István Köstler. And unfortunately, they didn't really get along well with each other. So at the beginning, he was quite stuck as a composer. So back then, Hungary was part of the Habsburg Empire, and there was a lot of German influence. They were much, much stronger than anything else, of course. So he was very much influenced by the music of Richard Strauss, Johannes Brahms, but it didn't really help his composition technique, so to say. And also there was this movement at the beginning of the 20th century in Hungary to maybe also gain some more independence on many levels from the Habsburg Empire, that the composers should write something Hungarian. But the problem was that back then they didn't really know what was the real Hungarian folk music and folk culture. It was not really known because not yet were so many songs collected. And Bartók also wrote the Kossuth Symphony, this symphonic poem, in this kind of attitude, so to say. And he wrote this symphonic poem over this political figure, Kossuth, who symbolized the independence of Hungary. But the music itself was nothing revolutionary. It was more like a continuation of a mixture of the music of Franz Liszt and Johannes Brahms, a bit of Strauss. But he felt that this was not what he really wanted. It was not really his way of composing. So he was, on one hand, very frustrated. On the other hand, he was very stuck. And that's why he was very, very interested to go to the land and collect folk songs himself. And as far as we know, he notated his first folk song, real folk song, in 1904, and later he tried to continue. But the first big collecting tour, which led him to Transylvania, it was in 2007. And that was the first time when he also used the phonograph. With this machine, he was able to record the songs. So he didn't have to rely only on the notation in the moment, but he could record these songs, and it was very, very useful for him. But going with this huge machine to the peasants, to the folk people who never seen such machine, of course it was very scary for them. So at the beginning, to gain their trust, it was really not easy. But the more time Bartók spent with them, the more time Bartók spent in the lands, he felt that this is really the place where he belonged. The clearest source, basically, what you can get. He discovered the ancient folk songs based on pentatone scales, which he thought that didn't even exist. And he was so happy that he found them. Also folk songs, they were based on different modal scales. So the point was that he could somehow break out from this classical major minor system, this way of thinking. He was really paralyzed by that, and he tried to find new ways to improve and find his own voice, find his own way of composing. So then he tried to classify how one can use the folk songs. On the first layer, on the first level, one could use a folk song which stays really intact, and you do kind of harmonize it, but the folk song itself stays the same. You can put an introduction or something to the end, but the folk song stays really the same. This is the first level. The second layer, where the composer imitates something like a folk songs, but he doesn't, or she doesn't use a real folk songs, but she imitates, which sounds like a folk song. And the third layer, where actually this language became so much your own that you don't need to use either folk song nor an imitation, but your way of speaking with the music has this language inside, how it behaves, how it moves, how it feels, how the wind blows from your music is basically reminds you to these folk songs. This is the highest level, the highest layer, which he aimed for from the very beginning, and which he achieved, of course, extremely well. And I just want to share with you another very interesting quote by Bartók himself about collecting folk songs and how this influenced him as a composer. Mind a parasztzenének tanulmányozása azért volt számomra döntő jelentőségű, mert rávezetett arra, hogyan függetleníthetem magam teljesen az eddigi dur-moll rendszer egyeduralma alól. Mert a gyűjtés útján nyert dallamkincs túlnyomó és éppen legértékesebb része a régi egyházi hangnemekben, vagyis a görög és bizonyos még primitívebb, pentatónikus hangnemekben mozog, azon kívül a legváltozatosabb és legszabadabb ritmikus alakulatot és ütemváltozást mutatja, úgy a rubato, mint a tempo giusto előadásban. Kiderült, hogy a régi, ami műzenénkben többé nem használatos hangnemsorok egyáltalában nem vesztették el életképességüket. Alkalmazásuk újszerű, harmonikus kombinációkat is lehetővé tett. A diatonikus hangsor kezelése a merev dur-moll skálától való megszabaduláshoz vezetett, és végső következményében ahhoz, hogy teljesen szabadon rendelkezhetünk kromatikus 12 hang rendszerünk minden egyes hangja felett. Let's explore a bit harmony and form and how these elements shaped Bartók's compositions over the years. Because his style of composing went through quite a lot of change over the years. As I already mentioned at the very beginning, he was very much influenced by German music, and then he stumbled upon something incredible which even he said he couldn't imagine, and that was the Hungarian folk culture, the Hungarian folk songs. Also, another big influence for him was French music, and especially the encounter with Debussy's music. Around the turn of the 20th century, Bartók's music took a new direction, and he began to incorporate all 12 tones in the chromatic scale into pieces like, for example, the 14 bagatelles for piano and the first string quartet. What's very interesting actually, how this harmonic development is somewhat similar to Schönberg's, even though Bartók hadn't encountered Schönberg's music until 1912. And when he did hear Schönberg's music, it was also a big effect on him, and made him realize that they were on the same path. But Bartók never really went into this dodecaphone word completely, and he never really used Reyes as Schönberg was building up his pieces, only in the violin concerto, but also just as a melodic game. Also, we have to mention this axis system by Ernő Lendvai. It's a very, very interesting idea and concept, which basically says that Bartók used the classical harmony and expanded over the complete circle of fifths. So the relations of the tonic, dominant and subdominant functions, you expand that for each and every steps of the circle of the fifths, and there you get actually three axis, and one tonic axis, one subdominant axis, and one dominant axis. And then the tonic axis is like C. If we take the C as the origo, then is C, E flat, F sharp, and A. But we shouldn't see this C, E flat, F sharp, and A as a diminished chord, but rather two combined tritonus. So C is in pair with the F sharp, and E flat has a polarity change with the A. He gives examples for this kind of idea in the sonata for two pianos and percussion, where we start the whole piece in F sharp minor, and then in the third movement we arrive to C major. There is a big polarized tension between these, so this tritonus step. So then it means that actually Lendvai understands these both polarities with the same amount of energy, so to say. They just have opposite directions, opposite kind of polarization, and this tension which holds the piece together. But we can also understand this actually like Fi small as a very, very far dominant, and which will be released in the third movement, and the C major is the real tonic of the piece. And Lendvai also gives another example, which is from the Bluebeard's Castle, which also starts in an F sharp minor. And the high point of the piece, where Judith opens the fifth door, where Bluebeard presents his kingdom, and where we hear this amazing culmination in the orchestra. But we have to note actually that this theory must be taken with a grain of salt. So it's really not always working, this system, and it looks like that Lendvai picked a bit selectively the pieces to his system. It sometimes just doesn't apply and doesn't work like that. And it's also similar for his other big theory, which is built around the golden ratio. The golden ratio is based on the Fibonacci numbers, and you can see everywhere around you in nature, even in human face, how the proportions are on the human face. If you look at galaxies, like this kind of stuff, you will see everywhere golden ratio. And it's a beautiful analogy to connect music in our world, but it's also not always true, unfortunately. So there also Lendvai picked some examples which serves his narrative, but sometimes it's slightly off or not completely like that. But I think we also have to just note that I mean, this analytical brain and the composer's brain work just in a different manner. I don't think Bartók was thinking like this while he was composing, like, yeah, let's add there one more bar because then it will be golden ratio. I really don't think so. So he was rather looking for shapes and forms in many layers, harmonic layers, melodic layers, rhythmical layers, where they meet, how they meet, and how they sound together, rather than this very analytic way of thinking. I mean, all this kind of knowledge, of course, it was in the back of his mind, but that's absolutely fantastic about Bartók. And basically, for me, it really on the same level, this kind of universal way of thinking, like for example in Bach's music, which I also feel very similar, that he was able to melt so many things into himself, and then he was able to create something very unique by combining all these kind of elements. If you're more interested in this topic, then I really recommend the books of Ernő Lendvai. Unfortunately, there are not all of his books are available in English, but the analysis of Bartók's music is, so you can have it even, I think, online. You can read it. I will put a link in the description, and if you're interested, I think it really worth to read about. He speaks about this axis system, the way of how golden ratio works in Bartók's music, and all other different kind of stuff. Very interesting. A major element was actually the folk part, which I have to say in the 20th century many critics didn't really understand, and they basically hated this kind of element of Bartók's music, and was not appealing to them. They thought it's just stupidly naive, folkish, partly understandable for historical reason, partly a bit narrow-minded, I would say. Like critics like René Leibovitz or Theodor Adorno, or even the composer and conductor Pierre Boulez also didn't like Bartók at the very beginning. Then it's very interesting that, for example, and I would actually suggest one of his recordings from the 4 orchestra pieces, but he recorded it three times. So it looks like also he recorded also the Concerto, of course. So it looks like that later he found a way how to understand Bartók. All this kind of analytic way of looking of Bartók music, I think a bit misleading, because he had so many layers, and trying to apply like a generic system or a rule, it's like almost impossible. And we see this kind of amazing layeredness in his pieces already in the very early 4 orchestra pieces, and this very quickly changing, sometimes in character, sometimes in metrics, sometimes harmonies, and this makes Bartók music also not easy to understand. So it's, as a listener, I think it's very good to know about these things. Harmony things, form things, how he used rather static symmetrical structures, or more dynamic structures like golden ratio, for example. So it's very good to have these kind of thoughts in the back of our mind. But when we come to listening and enjoying Bartók's music, we should focus rather, and of course this requires a good interpretation which interprets all the movements, the layers in the music correctly, and have an idea, an overview about the piece. This requires a good interpretation, and then we listen to this interpretation. I think we just let music affect us, and then later, if we are so much into music, we can get the score. If we can read the score, analyze it, but that's for another evening. and another time. Four orchestral pieces, of course, have four movements. The first one is the preludium, second is a scherzo, third is intermezzo, and the fourth is a marche funèbre. So he composed the pieces between just after Bluebird's Castle and before The Wooden Prince, somewhere around 1911, 1912. But he didn't finish the composition. He put it aside, and then actually at the beginning of 20s, so 1920s, 1921, 22, because of his new editor, he finished the orchestration of the music, and then it was premiered by Ernő Lendvai in 1922. The four movements, some of them, the first two, the preludium and the scherzo, have some resemblance with other earlier orchestra pieces by Bartók. The preludium has similarities with the two pictures. The first one of the two pictures, which is blooming, so it's almost like a plein air, a painting. And the second one, the scherzo, has resemblance with the two portraits. From the two portraits, the second one, which is the grotesque. So it's interesting that these first two movements have maybe a stronger bond than the third and the fourth. The fourth, the marche funèbre, has a resemblance on the marche funèbre of the Kossuth Symphony. The other piece on the recording is the Concerto for Orchestra by Béla Bartók. This is a late work of his. It was written in America. They emigrated to the USA in 1940 with his wife, Dita Pastori, and at the beginning, Peter, their son, couldn't come with them. They left Hungary because of the Second World War and what Hitler's Nazi empire unleashed upon the world and upon Europe. They were constantly under stress because of existential reasons, money reasons at the beginning, and it was very, very, very hard for Bartók to live in this kind of environment, in this city environment. As I mentioned before, Bartók felt really at home in the world of the peasant people, in the land, and he never really liked living in a city, especially so huge like New York. He felt very, very distant and disturbed by this environment. And then also during his last years in America, he fell ill, and unfortunately he was diagnosed leukemia too late, and his state of health constantly got worse. During these years, he didn't really find the inspiration, and also under so much stress, he didn't really find the way and the time to compose. So the piece was commissioned in 1943 by Serge Kushevitsky, who was back then the conductor of the Boston Symphonic Orchestra, and he commissioned this piece from Bartók. And even though Bartók was already quite ill back then, he completed this piece quite quickly in just a few months. And then it was premiered in 1944 in Boston, conducted by Serge Kushevitsky. When it was premiered in 1944, Bartók wrote a little text where he explained with some words about the form. E szimfóniaszerű zenekari műnek a címét az egyes hangszerek vagy hangszercsoportok koncertáló vagy szólisztikus jellegű kezelésmódja magyarázza. A virtuóz hangszerkezelés például az első tétel kidolgozásának fugátó szakaszaiban jelenik meg, részfúvó hangszerek, vagy a zárótétel főtémájának perpetuum mobile-szerű futamaiban, vonósok, és különösen a második tételben, ahol a hangszerek mindig párosával jelennek meg egymást követően brilliáns passzázsokban. And now about the recording. So what I just told you about the harmony and form and how Bartók developed all these kind of layers in his compositions and melted all these kind of influences within himself, how he transferred these to the compositions. Unfortunately, these very layered way of thinking about music doesn't really come through the recording. It sounds a bit generic. Karina wrote the booklet herself, where he explains what happens in the music of the 4 orchestra pieces, what happens in the music of the concerto. She certainly looked at the score, she looked behind the music, but I think there are just more layers which one can discover in these pieces. And I feel that, for example, in the 4 orchestra pieces, she writes that the piece was very much influenced by French music, especially Debussy's music. She went a bit, I think, too much in this impressionistic way. So I see like clouds of colors, but I don't see engraved the little people on the painting, so to say. So I'm very much missing the details, and also, I mean, articulation, which is quite important in Bartók's music because it's so much rooted in Hungarian language. It's sometimes neglected. This is unfortunately very, very important point. Very important point actually, how it relates to folk music, like how it moves, all this kind of parlando, rubato or tempo giusto characters, which sometimes a bit ironed out or maybe misunderstood. Also, I was a bit missing the general picture of the pieces, the structure of the pieces, and so this overview that I know exactly how are the energies between the parts of the pieces. Sometimes also like how the orchestration structured these kind of decisions, like what to bring in the front and what to maybe hide a bit more. So this hierarchy in the orchestration, I mean, less diplomatic, so to say, more direct in a way. I mean, in this kind of sense, less impressionistic. Because of this impressionistic image, it sounds sometimes a bit lazy or like sloppy, a bit slow, but it's not always the tempi. Sometimes the tempis are also actually slower that Bartók indicates in the partiture. But I will give you some more detailed examples when I play you some excerpts. I mean, it's also interesting actually, the Lendvai also writes about these 4 orchestra pieces, and he makes this analogy between the 4 temperaments of Dürer, so his last painting, where the 4 apostles that they represent 4 archetypes, so the melancholic and the sanguinic, phlegmatic and choleric, and he says that they apply for these 4 pieces. So it also puts the 4 pieces in a coherent and more universal picture. So the first is the melancholic, which is put in this nature landscape, so to say, and the second one is the sanguinic, which has all this kind of crazy burst of anger. Sometimes it gets calmed down. The third one is the phlegmatic, where he doesn't really know what to do with his life, so to say. And the fourth is the choleric, very, very deeply concerned and It also has a bit similar character to the march from the Kossuth Symphony. This is a live recording, but we also have to note that nowadays live recordings are not like in the old days, probably, where the concert was recorded and finito, but probably the general rehearsal it was recorded and maybe they stayed after the concert to polish some mistakes, or I don't know how it was done. I'm just saying that this is the general practice, so to say, when it comes to making live recordings, and this I know by personal experience. The same things apply also a bit for the concerto. In the second movement, which is the game of pairs, they take a very, very fast tempo, 90, 94, something like that. And in the partiture, there is written 74. And I think I know why she does that. And it's the idea is coming from George Scholti. When they were recording it with the Chicago Symphony Orchestra, musicians were very unhappy about the tempo. It felt very slow and dragging, and then I don't know, one instrumentalist came, I think percussion, that actually in his part is written 94. He makes the case that he was able to recover some proof that actually Bartók did a mistake when he wrote 74 and he wanted 94, and that's why I think Katarina is making this movement so fast. The problem only is that it loses the game part of the movement, so it feels a bit forced into the game, you know. I mean, the game of pairs, it has to invite the other one to play the game and not pushed into the game. And these kind of tempo decisions are for me sometimes questionable, but all in all I am very, very happy that they recorded this, and especially 4 orchestra pieces, because there are not so many recordings from the 4 orchestra pieces like from the concerto. They are not so popular and they are really amazing pieces, so I'm happy that they did it. I would like to also give you few recommendations for the 2 pieces. Recommendations for recordings which I find very, very good and very interesting. And maybe it's not surprising that my picks are going to Hungarian conductors, not always Hungarian orchestras, but Hungarian conductors. So as I mentioned, that the second movement of the orchestra piece is the Scherzo, has something similar with the 2 portraits, the second piece of the 2 portraits, the grotesque one, but I believe it also has something similar with the beginning of the Wonderful Mandarin, which is composed in 27. The orchestration of the 4 orchestra pieces was finished in 21-22. So also in the Mandarin, the second violin is playing this. Also, it's in 6/8. The scherzos in 3/4. So here in the Mandarin, the second violin are playing this crazy tornado dance, and the flute, oboe, and clarinet is playing this unforgivable, very insisting theme. The trombone is coming in with the tutum, already projecting a very wide 30 minutes ahead of us if we are doing the suite. And the scherzo is somewhat really similar how it starts. Also the second and first violin is playing a bit similar, but it starts actually with two upbeats. So so you can hear it's a bit similar actually, also from the character and how the orchestration is done. It's full of energy, and for example, the main tension is not on in the bars which are played, but the bars where the silence is. So we have no idea what's going to happen. And I think many times in the recording the silences are either like covered, or I don't know. Nowadays everyone is afraid of silences, and this tells maybe something also about our society. And there is this example which I mentioned about live recording. I don't know if they edited out or it was just too complicated, where the flute plays with the celesta, so the G should be sounding also in the celesta and also in the flute, and they leave out and they just meet together on the F. For me it's a bit strange and pity, because or maybe it just didn't come in the concert and it's really just a concert recording, you know, that's also very possible, and then they didn't edit it in. And then this should be celesta and flute, and instead of this you just hear flute and they meet on the one. So it's a Vorschlag. I don't know. This is like a very little detail, and if you don't have the score, of course you don't notice. But I was wondering if it was a decision or accidentally happened like that. So then comes the third movement, the intermezzo, which is in Lendvai's view, this is the phlegmatic view. Phlegmatic in this sense, I think he meant probably that he doesn't really know where he wants to go. So he always tries and fails, tries and gives up. And then sometimes we get kind of a half resolution to our problem. And all the tries on the recording sounds a bit the same. But before the try, you should have some initial thought what you want to try and how you want to try. It doesn't know, because silence is very important here. A lot of question mark, a lot of tries. This should somehow reflect more in the interpretation, I think. So it's just very calm, you know, the interpretation is just very calm. Also sometimes again, like how you double, you know, like or triple. We have to ask ourselves then which voice should come forward, you know, or how it should come forward. This is actually also a very interesting question of the beginning of the concerto, where the fluters are playing this But in the fourth one, what I was again a bit missing, the power of the silence. So how the end is actually, because it was so the sforzato ends how it ends, and it doesn't really matter, but it does really matter because that defines how powerful the silence is. So the beginning of the concerto, the cello and the double bass plays this line, establish the scene. On these long held notes by the cello and the violin and the double bass, then comes the tremolo. So there is this big septem, which is not a nice interval, we could say. I mean, there is certainly a lot of tension, and this tension is not so much hearable. I also believe actually that the tremolo should not be constant with the speed. It's also possible that it starts maybe a bit. Starts a bit slower and towards the middle, so we go around the C, and then we come back with chromatic steps, and probably where is the biggest, probably is the fastest. I mean, there is, I believe, articulation and tremolo and all these kind of things are flexible things, and they should not work like, okay, now I push the legato button and now I play legato. But the articulation should serve the musical meaning, as well the tremolo should serve the musical meaning. And then comes in the first violin, second violin, braccia, and the braccia should say ponticello. From the ponticello, which is playing more towards the bridge of the instrument, it creates a very metallic sound, very menacing sound, and unfortunately so there is a lot of tension already at the beginning, so this tension is a bit taken away, and not only because of this effect, but because how we surround the sea with these chromatic steps. Sorry. I mean, all of this on top of the C sharp. Here it's written legato, piano legato, but also there is a certain articulation, which is more strong. I believe that the articulation has a certain meaning, how you... the sixth bar is a starting bar. And here the first violin is playing the C tremolo, and then the flute is joining on the second beat also with the C tremolo. And now is the question actually, do you introduce the flutes as a completely new color from the beginning, or you try to melt the flutes into somehow this soundscape, and then actually the flutes stay alone and they melt away, so to say. I mean, not like on the Dali paintings, but it's rather like, it's like a magic trick, you know. It was there, but it's not there anymore. Elillan. And we have so good words expressing these kind of stuffs in Hungarian. Unfortunately, my English is lacking these kind of nuances. Disappears very quickly. Elillan. And I think if you want to disappear quickly, and this is a phenomenon, that then you should not slow down. And they are slowing down. So basically killing the whole action. I mean action, which is very nuanced and very small and almost unnoticeable, and it comes out from this cloud, like a vision which we saw just for a brief moment. We are not sure. So the second movement, which is the gioco della coppie, which means more or less the game of two, and yeah, I mean in the partiture it's written 74 for a quarter, which would be like something like, I mean it's super nice movement. So basically the instruments are playing always in pairs, and first, for example, and in different intervals. So the bassoon plays in sexth. So if you take this 74 for 1 quarter, 74 for 1 quarter, then it's actually pretty slow. Sorry. Pretty slow. And then I read that György Solti was... Actually, the orchestra members were quite unhappy with this tempo, and then I don't remember which instrumentalist, but came like, look, maestro, in my score he stays 94 instead of 74. And then he did also some research, tried to get the manuscript, but I think there is no manuscript. But somehow they found out that actually the 94 is probably what, and it's also, there are some sources for that, so what Bartók really wanted. So it's not allegretto scherzando, but allegro scherzando. So 94, and on that recording actually the Chicago Symphony Orchestra, they really play 94. And that's like this if we play 94. And so on. And I mean it's a much more pleasant tempo, I think, also to play and to make some game around it. But on the recording it's even faster than that, and it feels a bit pushed. So you are not inviting the other half of the couple to play a game, but you push him or her into the game. I'm not totally sure. I mean, for sure Karina knew about this 74-94 debate, and I think nowadays it's mostly played 94. But it shouldn't feel somehow pushed. So, and then comes the oboe in terz. And then comes the clarinet. Clarinet comes in septime, and the flute plays in quint. So each of the instrument groups, they are playing in different intervals, and the trumpets play in second. That's actually quite funny and grotesque, because then the violas are playing glissandos. So in the middle of this movement comes this very beautiful chorale in the trombones and tuba, trumpets, trombones, and tuba. Not completely how it's put down in the orchestra, because I cannot manage to play everything. I mean, it would be. It sounds better. Third movement, very beautiful elegia. It could remind us somewhat to the seventh door of the Bluebird's Castle, where we see a pond, and then Judith asks, what are these? And then Bluebird says, these are tears. And also here there is this waterfall-like effect in the clarinet, then comes in the flute, and the oboe is playing a very lonely melody, which is more like a lament, especially true for Hungarian folk laments. We have also this category. There are so many of them which fall into this category, where we lament over the loss of the people. That was a strategy to probably get over the losses together, so in a community, and they sang together these kind of laments, and usually they had very small range of notes, so in this case it's a small third, and so limited set of notes. Yes, we have to also know the context of this piece. Bartók has been living in the US for like 3-4 years when he's composing this piece, and he had incredible homesick. He didn't feel very well in the US, and he missed very much the people of the villages, this lifestyle which they had, and I mean, this also a testament of that. But it's very, 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 very beautiful. I just show you how the seventh door, the Bluebeard seventh door. Tears, my Judith, tears. And then you have this first in Amor. So, I mean, the texture is a bit similar. What is very interesting actually in the last movement, that it has two endings. So when Bartók wrote the piece, it was a bit shorter, and then later in 45, I believe, 44, 45. So later Bartók added actually 602, 625, so more 23 bars, and nowadays I think it has a much more grandiose ending, and I think all the orchestras are playing with this second one. And it's always a question which one you do after one composer like do one version and then do a second version, and which one is truer. I hope you learned maybe something from this episode or you found it interesting. And if you haven't subscribed to this channel, it would be really a great help to this channel if you do it. And I will try to bring some other interesting videos, and hopefully it won't take too long to do the third ones, but yeah, I'm trying my best. I hope you enjoy it and listen to Karina's recording. Try to listen the other recordings I suggested if you have a little time, and maybe just movements. It's also possible bit by bit. And try to read the books which I recommended you. And yeah, see you in another video. Take care and all the best.